Steph Curry's phone vibrated with an uncommon insistence during breakfast on a seemingly normal Tuesday morning. But the voice on the other end of the line carried a weight that made his world stop instantly. "Steph?" Dell Curry's voice sounded different. Not the confident and calm voice that Steph had known all his life, but something choked, vulnerable, loaded with decades of repressed emotion. "Son, we need to talk. In person. There's something I should have told you a long time ago." Steph paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, feeling something tighten in his chest. In 35 years of life, he had rarely heard his father use that tone, a mixture of urgency, regret, and something that felt very much like fear. "Dad, is everything okay? You sound—" Steph began, but Dell gently interrupted him. "Not over the phone, son. This is a conversation that needs to happen face to face, a conversation that should have happened 30 years ago. Can you perceive that there are moments in life where a simple phone call carries the weight of decades not lived, of truths not spoken that are about to reshape everything we thought we knew about our own history?" To fully understand why Dell Curry, at 69 years old, finally decided to break a silence he had religiously maintained for 3 decades, we need to go back to the early 1990s, when Steph was just a bright-eyed child with dreams bigger than his small and fragile body. It was 1993, and Dell Curry was at the peak of an NBA career that, while respectable, had never reached the heights of superstardom he secretly desired. Playing for the Charlotte Hornets, Dell was known as a reliable shooter, a valuable bench player, but rarely the name that appeared in headlines or that children imitated in backyards. The Curry family apartment in Charlotte wasn't luxurious by current NBA standards, but it was comfortable. A home full of love, laughter, and the constant sound of a basketball bouncing in the backyard, where a 5-year-old boy named Steph spent all his free time trying to imitate the movements he saw his father make on television. The aroma of pancakes that Sonia Curry prepared on Sunday mornings mixed with the smell of leather from basketballs scattered throughout the house, creating an atmosphere that breathed family, dreams, and infinite possibilities. But behind this facade of domestic harmony, Dell carried a weight that no one in the family suspected. What is most impressive is how some fathers manage to smile genuinely at their children while carrying worries that could crush less determined men. "Daddy, teach me that shot!" Steph would shout every afternoon when Dell came home from practice, his little eyes shining with pure admiration that made his father's heart race with pride and, secretly, with growing anxiety about the future. Steph was small for his age, too thin, with coordination still developing. Youth team coaches frequently looked at him with poorly disguised skepticism when Dell took him for evaluations. "He has potential," was the most common diplomatic comment. "But he'll need a lot of special work to compensate for physical limitations." It was in those hours, watching his son be underestimated by the same types of people who had doubted him throughout his career, that Dell made decisions that would change everything. Decisions he would keep in absolute secrecy for 3 decades. Jennifer Walsh, a trainer specialized in developing young athletes who worked with some of the best prospects in the region, had agreed to evaluate Steph after much insistence from Dell. The cost of her private sessions was astronomical for the family budget, $300 per session, twice a week, plus additional fees for use of specialized facilities and specific equipment. How is it possible that a father looks into his son's bright eyes and doesn't move mountains to transform impossible dreams into tangible reality? "Mr. Curry," Jennifer had said after the first week of training, "Steph has something special. It's not the physique that can develop with time. It's something in the way he processes the game, how he sees patterns that other 5-year-old boys don't even notice. But it will require serious investment if you want to give him a real chance. That night, Dell stayed awake until late in the kitchen, calculating and recalculating numbers that simply didn't add up. His NBA salary, while respectable by normal standards, couldn't accommodate the costs of specialized training, customized equipment, travel to showcase tournaments, and all the other expenses necessary to give Steph the chance his unique talents deserved. It was then that Dell made the first of a series of decisions that would secretly define the next 15 years of his life. He began selling things. First, small items that no one would notice. Expensive watches he had received from sponsors, personal. Training equipment. Even some of his signed game jerseys that collectors would pay well to have. Can you perceive that paternal love sometimes manifests not through words or grand gestures, but through silent sacrifices that children never come to know? "Where is your Rolex watch?" Sonia asked one morning, noticing Dell's bare wrist during breakfast. "Oh, I sent it to be repaired," Dell lied easily, having already deposited the $2,500 from the sale into the separate account he had opened specifically to fund Steph's training. "It'll be back next week." The lie burned in his throat, but not as much as the idea of having to look into Steph's eyes and explain why he couldn't continue with the special training that was clearly making a difference in his development. During the following months, Dell developed an elaborate system to secretly finance Steph's future. He accepted paid appearances he would normally refuse, worked at basketball camps throughout the summer, and even began giving private lessons to children of wealthy executives who wanted to say their kids had trained with an NBA player. Robert Kim, the family accountant, began noticing discrepancies in family expenses. "Dell, are you sure about these numbers? Because mathematically, you should be spending more than you earn, but somehow the bills are being paid." "I manage some things separately," Dell responded vaguely, technically not lying, but also not revealing that he had begun using credit cards for basic family expenses while directing all his liquid money toward Steph's athletic development. It's impossible not to feel admiration when we realize how far a father is willing to go to transform his son's potential into reality, even if it means sacrificing his own comfort and financial security. The sessions with Jennifer Walsh were working. Steph, now 7 years old, was developing a shooting mechanic that impressed even veteran coaches. His understanding of the game was years ahead of his physical age, and his dedication to training was total. "Dad," Steph said one night after a particularly intense training session, "thank you for giving me this chance. I know it must cost a lot of money." Dell felt his heart tighten. "Don't worry about money, son. Just worry about being the best you can be." Another necessary lie, because the truth was that Dell was worrying about money every day, every night, in every free moment he had. He had begun taking loans against his own future, using optimistic projections of future earnings to justify present expenses he knew he couldn't sustain indefinitely. Some loves are so deep they express themselves through silence, and Dell was discovering that silence about sacrifice can be the purest form of paternal love. The breaking point almost came when Steph was 9 years old. Dell had exhausted his savings, maximized his credit cards, and even secretly mortgaged the house again to continue funding the increasingly expensive and sophisticated training Steph needed to compete with boys from more affluent families. It was during one of those sleepless nights, calculating debts that seemed like insurmountable mountains, that Dell made the most extreme decision of all. A decision that would shape his life for the next 25 years, and that he swore never to reveal to anyone, especially Steph. Naturally, this leads us to the moment where we discover that some sacrifices are so profound they completely redefine our understanding of unconditional love and how far a father is willing to go for his son's dreams. But Dell didn't know that, 3 decades later, a health crisis would force him to confront not only his own mortality, but the urgent need to finally share the weight of that secret he had carried alone for so long. The call Steph had received that Tuesday morning was the result of Dell finally realizing that some silences, however well-intentioned they may be, can become walls between people who love each other deeply. And sometimes, the only way to honor decades of silent sacrifice is by finally breaking that silence, even if it changes everything forever. The most extreme decision came on a March night in 1997, when Dell Curry was sitting at his kitchen table at 3 in the morning, surrounded by stacks of bills that seemed to multiply like a financial hydra, each head cut off, generating 2 new debts in its place. Steph, now 9 years old, was sleeping, peacefully upstairs, perhaps dreaming of perfect shots and crowds shouting his name. He didn't know that downstairs, his father was about to make a decision that would completely redefine the course of both their lives. A decision so radical that Dell swore never to reveal, no matter the consequences. The envelope on the table contained an offer that had arrived 3 days earlier. A lucrative contract to play in the European League for 2 seasons, with guaranteed salary that would be 3 times larger than anything Dell could expect to earn staying in the NBA as a bench veteran approaching the end of his career. Can you perceive that there are moments where fathers are forced to choose between their own dreams and their children's dreams, knowing that only one can survive? The proposal was from a team in Milan, Italy. The money would be enough not only to pay off all the debts Dell had secretly accumulated, but also to create a substantial fund that would guarantee Steph's specialized training for the next 10 years without financial stress, without painful sacrifices, without the constant anxiety that was consuming Dell from within. But accepting would mean leaving Charlotte, leaving the training system Steph had begun with Jennifer Walsh, leaving the family stability that allowed the boy to focus only on developing his talents without worrying about disruptive changes. Dell looked at the family photo on the table. Sonia smiling, Steph holding a basketball, bigger than his torso, Seth still a baby in his mother's arms. It was a photo of pure happiness, of a family that didn't know they were living above their means thanks to their provider's secret sacrifices. 2 years in Milan, Dell murmured to himself, and I could solve all financial problems. But Steph would lose 2 crucial years of development here, with coaches who know his potential. What is most impressive is how some decisions force us to choose between immediate security and investment in future possibilities that may never materialize. Dell picked up a pen and, instead of signing the European contract that would change his life, wrote a polite letter declining the offer. Then, with hands trembling slightly, he picked up another document he had been avoiding for weeks, an application for a second mortgage loan against the family house. He was literally betting the roof over his family's heads on the potential of a 9-year-old boy whom some coaches still considered too small, too weak, to have a future in elite basketball. In that early morning, Dell signed papers that would put him in debt for the next 15 years, choosing to stay in Charlotte so Steph could continue his athletic development without interruption. It was an astronomically risky bet on a future that existed only in the imagination and faith of a father who had seen something special in his son's eyes. During the following years, Dell developed a routine that would become his life, waking up at 5 in the morning to train individually before team practices, working at basketball camps during all summers, accepting every paid appearance available, and giving private lessons to anyone willing to pay to train with an NBA player. How is it possible that a man maintains a genuine smile for his son while carrying a financial weight that would be crushing for most people? "Dad, why do you work so much?" Steph asked one afternoon when he was 12 years old, watching Dell rush out for another private training session after a full day of practice with the Hornets. "Because working hard means you can concentrate only on being a child and playing basketball," Dell replied, kissing his son's forehead. "That's my responsibility, taking care of everything else, so you only need to worry about improving every day." Another necessary half-truth, because the reality was that Dell was working 16 hours a day to fund an investment in Steph that had become a complex financial operation involving multiple loans, credit cards, and personal sacrifices that no one in the family suspected. Jennifer Walsh was impressed with Steph's progress, but also concerned about the pressure she perceived Dell putting on himself. "Dell, are you sure you can sustain all this? Because I can adjust costs if necessary." "No," Dell responded firmly. "Steph is progressing exactly as he needs to progress. Money always works out somehow. Can you perceive that sometimes a father's faith in his son's potential becomes a force that literally moves financial and logistical mountains that would seem impossible to external observers?" As Steph grew and his talent became more obvious, Dell felt a mixture of immense pride and growing anxiety. Every compliment Steph received from coaches, every improvement in his technique, every moment of genius he showed on the court, validated the impossible bets Dell had made. But it also intensified the pressure, because now there was concrete proof that Steph had potential to reach the highest levels of basketball. And Dell knew that failing to financially sustain this development would be equivalent to robbing the world of an extraordinary talent. Robert Kim, who continued managing the family's finances, eventually confronted Dell about the situation that was becoming unsustainable. "Dell, you need to let me see all the numbers, because mathematically, what you're doing is impossible. You're spending more on Steph's training than you earn, and somehow you're still paying mortgage, car, food." "Rob, I appreciate the concern," Dell said, "but I have everything under control. Some investments only make sense long-term." It was technically true, but Dell didn't mention that the long-term he was visualizing required Steph to become not just a professional player, but an elite player. Something that was statistically almost impossible for any child, regardless of initial talent. It's impossible not to feel admiration when we realize that some fathers are willing to literally bet everything on their children, transforming parental faith into a driving force that defies all conservative financial logic. During Steph's high school years, Dell watched his son transform into one of the most exciting stars in youth basketball, but also faced some of the most stressful moments of his financial life. Costs had escalated to include travel to national tournaments, specialized equipment, sports, nutritionists, and even recruitment consulting to maximize Steph's chances of receiving a full university scholarship. "Dad, I see other parents stressed about recruitment and scholarships," Steph said one night during his senior year of high school. "But you always seem so calm about everything. How do you do it?" Dell smiled, hiding the fact that he had spent the previous night awake doing calculations about how he would sustain 6 more months of expenses if Steph didn't receive a full scholarship. "Because I have faith in you, son. And when you have true faith in someone, you find ways to make everything work. Some loves are so deep, they express themselves through silence. And Dell was discovering that this silence included not only hiding sacrifices, but hiding fears, anxieties, and moments of doubt that could affect Steph's confidence in himself. When Steph finally received a full scholarship to Davidson College, Dell felt relief so deep he almost fainted. For the first time in 8 years, he wouldn't have to find thousands of dollars monthly to fund his son's athletic development. But the relief was temporary because Dell realized he had gone into debt so deeply that even without training expenses, it would take years to recover financially. And then Steph began showing at Davidson that Dell had bet correctly. Not just correctly, but monumentally correctly. The boy coaches had considered too small was rewriting collegiate records and attracting national attention. How is it possible that a father watches his son realize exactly the dreams he bet everything on, and simultaneously feel overwhelming pride and a type of emotional exhaustion that comes from years carrying heavy secrets? Dell watched Steph become a national sensation at Davidson, then be selected in the first round of the NBA draft, then become a global superstar. Every milestone in Steph's career validated the impossible bets Dell had made, but also deepened the secret he carried. Because now, with Steph earning millions per year and becoming a global icon, how could Dell explain that he had almost financially ruined the family to make this possible? How could he reveal that he had lied, gone into debt, and sacrificed his own financial security for years? The secret had become such a fundamental part of Dell's identity that he couldn't imagine what life would be like without that weight. But it was also becoming increasingly heavy to carry, especially when he saw Steph being generous with money, assuming the family had always had financial stability. Naturally, this leads us to the moment where we realize that some secrets become so big and so defining that they eventually threaten to consume the very people who keep them. Dell had carried this burden alone for almost 3 decades, watching Steph become exactly what he had envisioned that night in 1997 when he refused the European contract. But secrets of this magnitude have lives of their own, and Dell was about to discover that keeping them forever can be more destructive than revealing them. The call Steph had received that Tuesday morning was the result of Dell finally realizing that some silences, however well-intentioned, can become emotional prisons that prevent genuine connections between people who love each other deeply. And sometimes, the greatest act of love a father can offer is the courage to be vulnerable about the sacrifices he made, even if it forever changes how his son sees him. The small and discreet restaurant in San Francisco was practically empty on a Thursday morning, just the soft sound of instrumental jazz playing in the background, while Dell Curry nervously stirred his coffee cup, waiting for a conversation he had mentally rehearsed for months, but for which he would never feel truly prepared. Steph arrived punctually, as always, but Dell immediately noticed something different in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and perhaps a hint of fear about what he was about to hear. In 3 decades of father-son relationship, they had never had a conversation that Dell had described as urgent and long overdue. "Dad," Steph said, sitting across from Dell and studying his face carefully, "you've had me worried since that phone call. What's going on?" Dell breathed deeply, his hands trembling slightly as he placed the cup on the table. At 69 years old, after a lifetime of being the pillar of strength for his family, he was about to become completely vulnerable in front of his son for the first time. Can you perceive that there are moments in life where decades of silent strength need to be temporarily set aside so that essential truths can finally emerge? "Steph," Dell began, his voice choked with emotion he no longer tried to hide, "there are things about your childhood, about how we managed to pay for your training, about sacrifices I made, things you never knew, and that I never wanted you to know." Steph leaned forward, feeling something tighten in his chest. Dad, whatever it is, we can deal with it together. No, Dell said, shaking his head. This is something I've carried alone for 30 years, and it's time for you to know the truth about the real price of your dreams. And then, like a dam that finally breaks after decades of accumulated pressure, Dell began telling a story that would make Steph see his entire life under a completely different light. When you were 9 years old, Dell began, I received an offer to play in Europe, Milan. The salary would be 3 times bigger than anything I could earn staying in the NBA. It was enough money to solve all our financial problems and still have left over for your training for the next 10 years. Steph remained quiet, processing. But you never played in Europe. Because I refused, Dell said, his voice breaking slightly. I refused because it would mean taking you out of Charlotte, taking you away from Jennifer Walsh, taking you out of the system that was working. So I stayed, and to pay for everything, I mortgaged our house, twice. What is most impressive is how a simple phrase can instantly recontextualize entire decades of memories, transforming apparently normal moments into acts of heroic sacrifice. Steph's face lost color. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying that for years, we spent more money on your training than I earned as an NBA player, Dell continued, tears beginning to stream down his face. I'm saying that I sold everything I had of value. Watches, equipment, even my signed game jerseys. I'm saying that I worked 16 hours a day for years to fund your development. Steph was speechless, trying to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. But you always said we had everything under control. I lied, Dell whispered, the words coming out like a confession of guilt he had carried for decades. I lied so you could concentrate only on being a child and developing your talent. I didn't want you to carry the weight of knowing how much I was sacrificing. How is it possible that a revelation has the power to instantly rewrite our understanding of our own history and the love of those who raised us? Dad, why did you never tell me? Steph asked, his own voice beginning to fail. Because, Dell responded, looking directly into his son's eyes, some loves are so deep they express themselves through silence. I didn't want you to grow up feeling guilty about my sacrifices. I wanted you to grow up feeling loved unconditionally. Steph began to cry, not the controlled tears of a professional athlete accustomed to cameras and interviews, but devastating tears of someone discovering that his entire life was built on sacrifices he had never imagined. When you asked me why I worked so much, Dell continued, when you saw me rushing out for another private lesson or another appearance after a full day of practice with the Hornets, you were seeing a father doing everything he could to turn your dreams into reality without you knowing the price. My God, Dad, Steph whispered, you almost financially ruined our family because of me? Not because of you, Dell corrected firmly. Out of love for you. Out of faith in your potential. Out of believing you had something special the world needed to see. And I was right, wasn't I? It's impossible not to feel the overwhelming impact when we realize that our journey of success was paved with sacrifices we never saw, sustained by a love that operated completely behind the scenes. Steph was sobbing now, decades of unexpressed gratitude exploding all at once. Dad, I never knew. All these years, I thought we had just been lucky, or that you earned more money than you actually earned. I made sure you thought that, Dell said. Because children should be able to dream without worrying about the cost of those dreams. That was my responsibility as a father, carrying the weight so you could fly. Dell then took out a folder he had brought with him. Steph, I brought something to show you. Documents I've kept all these years. Inside the folder were loan receipts, training receipts, records of personal item sales, bank statements showing years of complex financial operations. All the documentation of a father who had systematically dismantled his own financial security to build his son's future. This here, Dell said, pointing to a document, is the second mortgage loan I took when you were 10 years old. And this here are the receipts from sessions with Jennifer Walsh, $300 per session, twice a week, for 8 years. Steph looked at the numbers and felt as if the world was spinning backwards. The total amount of money Dell had invested in his development was astronomical. Literally more than many people earn in a lifetime. And this, Dell continued, showing another document, is the Europe contract I refused. 2 years, 3 times my NBA, salary, plus bonuses. I could have solved all our financial problems and still had money left over. Can you perceive that sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving someone everything they want, but sacrificing everything you have so they can achieve everything they are capable of being? Why are you telling me this now? Steph asked through tears. Dell hesitated for a moment, then decided to be completely honest. Because I received some medical results that made me realize my time might be more limited than I'd like. And because carrying this secret for 30 years has become a weight that's preventing our relationship from being as deep as it could be. The revelation about Dell's health made Steph feel as if he had been punched in the stomach. Dad, what did the doctors say? Nothing dramatic, nothing immediate, Dell said quickly, but enough to make me realize that if something happened to me without you knowing this story, I'd be robbing you of the chance to fully understand how much you were loved. Steph got up from the table and hugged his father with a force that surprised both of them. It wasn't the protocol embrace between adult father and son, but the devastating embrace of someone who had just discovered the true depth of the love he had received throughout his life. Dad, I don't know what to say, Steph sobbed in Dell's ear. I don't know how to process this. All these years, I thought I was just talented, that I had worked hard. But you literally bet everything on me. And it was the best bet of my life, Dell whispered back. Seeing you become not just the player I knew you could be, but the man you've become, was worth every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every bill that made me break out in cold sweat. How is it possible that a moment of revelation has the power to instantly transform gratitude into something so profound that words become completely inadequate? They remained embraced for several minutes, 30 years of unrecognized love completely flowing between them. Other restaurant customers began to notice, some recognizing Steph Curry crying in the arms of an older man, but neither of them cared who was looking. Dad, Steph finally said, pulling away to look into Dell's eyes, I'm going to tell this story. I'm going to tell the whole world about what you did. People need to know what kind of man you are. Steph, you don't need to. No, Steph interrupted firmly. Yes, I need to. Throughout my career, people congratulate me for my hard work, my dedication, my family values, but they don't know that all of this was possible because of a father who secretly risked everything so I could have a chance. Naturally, this leads us to the moment when we understand that some revelations are so powerful, they cannot be contained just between the people directly involved. They demand to be shared with the world. Some loves are so deep, they express themselves through silence, Steph said, repeating the words Dell had used. But sometimes, silence needs to be broken, so everyone can learn about what true paternal love really means. Dell nodded, finally at peace with the idea that the secret that had defined 3 decades of his life was about to become public. If you think it can help other people understand the value of paternal sacrifice, then maybe carrying this weight for so long was worth it. The conversation in the restaurant lasted 3 more hours, with Dell telling specific details about years of sacrifice and Steph processing a new understanding of his entire life. When they finally separated, both knew something fundamental had changed forever in their relationship. Not just because secrets had been revealed, but because the revelation had created an intimacy and gratitude that transcended anything they had experienced before. Steph's reaction to that revelation was about to shake the world, not through drama or controversy, but through the pure power of a story about paternal love that would redefine how millions of people think about sacrifice, family, and the invisible prices of realized dreams. 3 days after the conversation at the restaurant, Steph Curry was sitting in his home office, looking at the notes he had made about every detail Dell had shared, feeling as if he was discovering a new version of his own life, a version where every achievement had much deeper roots than he had ever imagined. His father's words echoed constantly in his mind. Some loves are so deep, they express themselves through silence. But now, Steph understood that the time had come to break that silence in a way that would honor not only Dell's sacrifices, but also inspire other fathers and sons to recognize the invisible costs of unconditional love. Sonia Curry found Steph in this position the following morning, surrounded by papers and lost in thoughts that seemed to be rewriting decades of family memories. "Did your mother know?" was the first question Steph asked when Sonia entered the office. Sonia sighed deeply, as if a weight she had carried for years could finally be put down. "I knew your father was making extraordinary sacrifices, but he never let me see the complete extent. He protected me, too, from the stress of knowing exactly how much we were risking. Can you perceive that sometimes love manifests not only in carrying heavy burdens, but in protecting those we love from knowing the exact weight of those burdens?" "Why did you never tell me?" Steph asked, his voice loaded with a mixture of admiration and deep sadness for having lived decades without knowing the complete truth. "Because," Sonia replied, sitting next to her son, "your father believed children should be able to pursue dreams without calculating the cost to their families. He wanted you to grow up believing everything was possible, not worrying about how expensive it was." That afternoon, Steph called his public relations agent, Michelle Carter. "Michelle, I need to schedule an interview. Something important. Something that will change how people see my story." "What kind of interview?" Michelle asked, recognizing the serious tone in Steph's voice. "One where I'm going to talk about the bravest man I've ever known and about sacrifices that need to be recognized after 30 years of silence. What is most impressive is how some stories remain dormant for decades until the perfect moment arrives to be shared with the world." The interview was scheduled with Tyler Brooks, a respected sports journalist who had covered Steph's career since Davidson and was known for approaching human aspects of athletes with sensitivity and depth. "Steph," Tyler said when they sat down for the interview, "you said you had a story to tell that would change how people see your journey. I'm listening." And then, with raw emotion that surprised even Tyler, who had interviewed Steph dozens of times, the global superstar began telling the story. Dell had kept secret for 3 decades. My father, Steph began, his voice already choked, spent 30 years hiding from me that he literally risked everything our family had so I could pursue my dreams. For the next 45 minutes, Steph revealed every detail. The refused European contract, the secret mortgage loans, the sold personal items, the 16-hour workdays, the well-intentioned lies to protect him from financial stress. How is it possible that an interview has the power to instantly recontextualize not only an athlete's career, but our understanding of the hidden costs of all realized dreams? When people congratulate me for my hard work, Steph said through tears he didn't try to hide, they don't know that my ability to work hard was possible because my father was working even harder behind the scenes, in ways I never knew. Tyler, veteran of thousands of interviews, was visibly emotional. Steph, how do you feel knowing this now? I feel overwhelmed by gratitude, Steph responded. And I also feel responsible for honoring these sacrifices in a way my father never asked to be honored. He did all this expecting I would never know. But now that I know, I cannot remain silent. The interview aired on a Thursday night and went viral within hours. It wasn't just a story about basketball or even about success. It was a story about the depth of paternal love that touched something universal in the human experience. It's impossible not to feel the impact when a personal story resonates so deeply that it becomes a mirror where millions of people see their own experiences with family sacrifice reflected. Comments began arriving in waves, fathers sharing their own stories of secret sacrifices for children, adult children calling parents to thank them for things they had never noticed, families having conversations about hidden costs of dreams and the importance of recognizing sacrifices that often go unnoticed. Robert Kim, who had managed the Curry family finances for decades, watched the interview and finally understood the discrepancies he had noticed over the years. Now everything makes sense, he said to his wife. Dell was operating a financial miracle I never could completely understand. Jennifer Walsh, the trainer who had worked with child Steph, also watched the interview with tears in her eyes. I knew Dell was making sacrifices, she said in a follow-up interview, but I never imagined the extent. This explains why he never missed a payment in 8 years, even when I knew it should be impossible for their budget. Dell was at home when the interview aired, and for the first time in 30 years, he watched his son talk about his life, knowing the complete truth had been revealed. It was a feeling of relief so deep he hadn't realized how heavy the secret had become, until he saw it finally released. "How do you feel, love?" Sonia asked, holding Dell's hand while they watched Steph publicly honor decades of silent sacrifice. "I feel complete," Dell responded. "For the first time in decades, there's nothing hidden between us, and Steph understands now why I did what I did." Can you perceive that sometimes the greatest gift we can give people we love is allowing them to honor our sacrifices, even when we prefer those sacrifices to remain invisible? In the weeks following the interview, Dell began receiving messages from fathers around the world, some sharing their own stories of sacrifice, others asking for advice on how to sustain children's dreams with limited resources, many simply expressing gratitude for seeing represented the paternal love they recognized in their own lives. "Your story made me call my father for the first time in 2 years," wrote a man from Atlanta. "I had never realized how much he must have sacrificed so I could go to college. My son is 12 years old and plays basketball," wrote a mother from Texas. "Watching your interview reminded me that the sacrifices I make today may be invisible to him now, But one day he'll understand that every sacrifice was an act of love. Dell and Steph's story became more than viral. It became a cultural phenomenon that changed conversations about parenthood, sacrifice, and gratitude around the world. How is it possible that a story about one family changes the way millions of other families relate to and value each other? Steph decided to do more than just tell the story. He established a foundation focused on helping parents with limited resources fund athletic development for talented children, using his own experience to identify families where parents were making secret sacrifices similar to those Dell had made. The Dell Curry Foundation for Youth Development, Steph announced at an emotional press conference, will ensure that other parents don't have to choose between financial security and their children's dreams. Dell was present at the announcement, and when Steph invited him to the stage, the ovation was so long and intense that both cried openly. These weren't tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude and recognition that had taken decades to be fully expressed. Some loves are so deep, they express themselves through silence, Steph said to the crowd, repeating the words Dell had used. But today, we're learning that sometimes silence needs to be broken, so love can be completely celebrated and honored. Naturally, this leads us to the moment when we understand that the most powerful stories are those that transform not only the people directly involved, but an entire culture around universal themes like family, sacrifice, and gratitude. 1 year after the revelation, Dell and Steph were again sitting in a restaurant. Not for painful revelations this time, but to celebrate the first anniversary of the foundation, which had already helped more than 200 families fund athletic development for talented young people. "Do you regret telling?" Dell asked. "Never," Steph responded immediately. "Actually, I regret it took 35 years to find out. Imagine how many years we lost where I could have thanked you adequately for the sacrifices you made." "They weren't lost years," Dell said, smiling. "They were years where you could be a child, young person, athlete, without carrying the weight of knowing what I was doing. And now that you know, our relationship can be even deeper. It's impossible not to feel hope when we realize that even secrets kept for decades can, when finally revealed, strengthen rather than damage the relationships we most value." Dell and Steph's story became legendary in the sports world, not for records or championships, but for what it revealed about the nature of unconditional love and the invisible prices of realized dreams. Some loves are so deep they express themselves through silence, but sometimes breaking that silence becomes the final act of love, allowing gratitude, recognition, and connection to flourish in ways that silence, however well-intentioned, could never allow. This is a story about secrets and revelations, but it's mainly a story about how true paternal love finds ways to operate miracles, even when, especially when, its beneficiaries never know the miracles are happening. And perhaps that's the most beautiful truth of all, that we are all products of invisible sacrifices made by people who loved us enough to carry heavy burdens in silence, so we could fly without knowing the weight of what sustained us.